Thank you, Deputy Speaker, and like all other members who've spoken on this motion on the 100th anniversary of the landings at Gallipoli, it is an honour and a privilege, and it's been a time when all Australians have remembered, reflected and rededicated themselves to the memory of the first Anzacs. As we move through the 4 years of war, the anniversary, we will continue to reflect and remember as the battles from Gallipoli through 1915 shifted to other parts of the Middle East and to the Western Front. Australia's contribution to the First World War was monumental. From a population of just under 5,400,000 joined up, 160,000 were wounded and 61,000 killed. 40% of all eligible men joined up. And I mention those statistics, Deputy Speaker, because they tell so much of the story, but not all of it. They tell us that every community, every family in every corner of our country was affected. But it's only when you look into the histories at the local level, as we've been doing in our local electorates, to the names of those 61,000 who lost their lives, that you can comprehend fully the effect on the families and the communities 100 years ago and in the years that followed. I attended a number of services, as all members in this place did, as you did, Deputy Speaker, in the lead up to Anzac Day, of course on Anzac Day itself, and in the days since. I attended the dawn service at Lilydale. The cenotaph bears the names of 25 locals who lost their lives in World War I. 25 young men who 101 years ago were walking the main street. They were young men in a young country with their lives ahead of them. And when you look to the stories, you can imagine how the families and the communities were shattered at that time. Leonard Lawler's name's on the cenotaph. He was one of the 750 to be killed on the day of the landings. Edwin Poyner's name is on the cenotaph. The Poyner family had a large farm that's now suburban housing blocks, just north of the town. And Ed joined up with his brother Frank on the same day. And they served together on the Western Front. And they were 25 metres apart when Ed was killed by a shell. J.D. Burns was the son of the Presbyterian minister. He was an outstanding scholar. Had penned the poem for England. He'd won a scholarship to Ormond College, but never got there because he joined up and he was killed in September at Gallipoli. The other names on the cenotaph: Rankin and Goodall, were brothers-in-law. Chevin and Briers were cousins. And you think of the effect on those families and the town back then, and then repeated in each town and each suburb across the country. And I mention this, Deputy Speaker, because some academics try to sum up the typical Anzac. And without being critical, when you look at the scale of it, it's a fruitless task, because every community was involved, every family to an extent, and every profession. And that scale, 100 years on, is hard to comprehend. The Yarra Valley was home to one Anzac who was awarded the Victoria Cross, George Ingram. I will say he does sum up some of the characteristics of the typical Anzac. And his family story is the story that we can find in other corners of Australia. That's all too typical back then. He was one of the first to join up, Deputy Speaker, and he was sent to Rabaul and he got malaria. So he was sent back to Australia and discharged. So he rejoined 5 hours later by changing his middle name. So he confused the authorities, and he's confused every local historian ever since. His brother Frank joined up in New Zealand, and his brother Alex joined up. They'd been a family of 4. They had a sister, but she died at a young age. Ronald and Alex saw action on the Western Front before George managed to get back there. But both Ronald and Alex were killed, leaving George as the only son, and he was awarded the VC in the last month of the war. 100 years on, the Anzacs would be amazed at a number of things. They'd be amazed at the technological advances in the world and the progress in our country. They'd be very proud that the values they believed in and they were fighting for have endured, and that Australia, which was a very young democracy back then, has succeeded and developed in the way it has. They'd be very humbled that we are not only remembering them, but remembering them in such numbers 100 years on. And as all members here attending services would agree, they'd be especially touched at the school children attending the services and playing a part, because of course they're our nation's future, and that's what they were fighting for. And in the time available, Deputy Speaker, I want to mention some of the schools and some of the students who played such an important role at the services. I want to mention Ruskin Park Primary and Bimbadeen Heights, who have a service every year in the lead up to Anzac Day and did on Anzac Day Eve. Yering Primary School, who always have a service in the days following Anzac Day. I want to thank the RSLs and community groups who hosted services in the lead up to Anzac Day or launches of local Centenary of Anzac grant commitments. The Yarra Junction Avenue of Honour I want to thank Rob Worley and Lorraine Green and Rhonda Simmons, and the Gladdisdale Primary School, the Upper Yarra High School, Wesboon Primary School and the Yarra Junction Primary School, who were all part of that service. The Healesville RSL Avenue of Honour service held on the 17th of April. I want to thank the school captain of Healesville High, Madison Wilson, and senior leader Kira Heatherich. I want to thank Birmingham Primary School, Monbulk Primary School, Mount Evelyn and the Patch, who participated in the Bells of Peace project. And I want to thank the Millwarra Primary School, Warburton Primary School and the RSL president from Warburton, Jamie Thomas, and Coral Reynolds, the commemorations coordinator, who conducted a very touching service on the launch of the Gallipoli Wall in Warburton. As a community, we will continue to remember and reflect with only the intensity a centenary can bring. And in closing, Deputy Speaker, I want to thank RSL presidents from Mount Evelyn, Roger Burness, and from Lilydale, Don Parsons, and local historian and member of my Centenary of Anzac Committee, Anthony McAleer, who determined in the days leading up to Anzac Day that not only would they have the best service possible, but they would have an individual service on the 100th anniversary of the death of each local Anzac. They had one on Anzac Day for Leonard Lawler, who I mentioned. They had one in Wandon the day after Anzac Day for Frank Nichols, a local from Wandon. And just last Friday, I was pleased to attend a service in Mount Evelyn for William Aitcher, who was killed on the 8th of May at Gallipoli. And to Anthony McAleer, who gave the address there, giving us an insight into his life as a local and a rich life it was in Melbourne and in the Mount Evelyn community. And Deputy Speaker, he was the son of German immigrants who joined up as one of the first Anzacs.